Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Veyt and the energy community combined. I am Christopher Royanis, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this conversation where we're going to delve into the very interesting topic of the geo markets in the energy community and what is the potential that is in these countries that could be added to the geo market. We have two very interesting guests here with us. So one from Veyt and one from the energy community that will share very interesting insights with us. But until I suggest that we wait for 1 minute so that everybody in our audience joins and is ready for the start of the webinar. All right, so it seems that our audience seems to have slowly joined. So before we start, before I introduce my colloquiators today, I would like to say a few words about who Veyt is and what Veyt does. So Veyt is a leading analytics provider in low carbon markets. Specifically, we focus our analysis on renewable power, renewable fuels, and carbon markets, and we provide in-depth analysis and research that has a global geographical coverage. Our aim with our product is to strengthen our clients' decisions with using our real-time analytics and our market intelligence that we aim at helping our clients spot risks and opportunities in their business. If you're interested to know more about what we do and what we can offer, you can always contact us in the email addresses that you will find at the end of this presentation. And you could always reach out and request for a demo of our platform in our website, veyt.com. As I said before, this webinar is hosted along with the energy community. It's a common webinar. And for those who are not familiar, what the energy community is, the energy community is an international organization that aims at extending EU's internal energy market principles to neighboring countries, which include the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. So the energy community was established via the Energy Community Treaty, which basically aims at extending the principles of energy security, regulatory reform, and helping in facilitating investments in energy infrastructure in these countries, which from now on we will be calling contracting parties. The final goal is to establish a single energy market where there will be unrestricted cross-border trade of energy and security of supply. So my name is Christopher Royanis. I am a renewable power analyst in Veyt, and I'm accompanied today by Irina, my colleague, senior renewable power analyst in Veyt, and our honored guest, Naida Tasso, who is a renewable energy expert in the energy community. And Naida basically has been doing a tremendous work in helping the contracting parties of the energy community to facilitate all the markets and regulatory reforms and needed for these low carbon markets to be established in these countries and to become functional. Before we dwell into the conversation and give the floor to our speakers, I would like to inform our audience that the recording of this webinar will become available in the end of this session, and we will send it to you via email. And there's going to be a Q&A section in the end of in the final phase of the webinar, where you can ask questions using the chat utility in Zoom, where you can direct your questions to the speakers. Please include your name next to your question so that we know to whom we can send the answer at the end of the webinar. Because as you can understand, if there are many questions, which we hope for, It will be impossible to answer all your questions, and we want to answer all your questions. So please include your name, and we will send an email to you with the answer to your question at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I will hand over the floor to Naida. Naida, thank you for being here and welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Christoph, and good afternoon to everyone on my behalf and, of course, on behalf of Energy Community Secretariat. It's my great pleasure to join today's event, and it's an even bigger pleasure to see more than 100 participants being interested in guarantees of origin in energy community. So I'm happy to provide you with an overview of what we have done so far. And what we are planning to do in the next period to enable system for guarantees of origin in energy community contracting parties. So Christos already kindly introduced the Energy Community Secretariat. Maybe I will just very briefly repeat that we're an international organization. Our headquarters is in Vienna. We are trying to bring together EU to our neighboring countries. So 9 of our contracting parties, you can see on the map in yellow, Western Balkans 6, plus Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And we have 3 observers in energy community. The organization itself was established by the treaty back in 2005, and next year we are celebrating 20 years of Energy Community Secretariat. Our objective is to extend and support actually contracting parties in transposing and implementing EU law in contracting parties. Among others, at the moment we are supporting contracting parties in the transposition and implementation of Renewable Energy Directive. And of course, one of the elements of the directive includes guarantees of origin. So we conducted 2 years ago a regional project on the guarantees of origin in energy community. But before that, I will just provide you with a brief overview what was the reason behind and why we focused on this area. Presumably, you all know what are the guarantees of origin. So those are certificates with the main purpose to provide the disclosure to final consumers and to prove that certain amount of energy is coming from renewable sources. RED 1 directive was focusing only on guarantees of origin for electricity, while RED 2 and now RED 3 directive are introducing guarantees of origin for other carriers as well, including gases and heating and cooling. Nevertheless, our project and our focus in energy community was at the moment on guarantees of origin for electricity. So beside the main purpose, obviously there are some externalities for the guarantees of origin, which include additional income for producers, of course, branding for the suppliers, green differentiation from the industry, and we actually received a lot of requests from the industries to support our contracting parties and issuing bodies to implement the system for guarantees of origin. And one, of course, of the main aspects or externalities or the benefits is giving the possibility to final consumers to actively participate in the energy transition by choosing the suppliers which can guarantee that they're selling electricity from renewable sources. So there are many reasons why we conducted the project, and now I will focus on the project itself and the results of it. So back in 2022, we conducted the project. We launched the public tender, and we had one of the service providers which provided registries for guarantees of origin for many member states, Grexel from Finland, winning the tender. And we started with implementation from January to June 2022. We had the 4 main aspects of the project. First one is to establish a national registries for guarantees of origin for each of our contracting parties. Those registries were obviously fully aligned with EECS standard, Renewables Directive, and upcoming CEN standard. We have created registries for all contracting parties besides Serbia, which already had a registry in place, and we had registries for Bosnia and Herzegovina for 2 entities separately. The second step of the project was training and knowledge transfer. So we educated, first of all, issuing bodies in our contracting parties how to utilize these registries, but also then we have had a separate trainings for different potential account holders how to use the registries. The third one was, of course, the obligation to have continuation of the framework, so to make sure that the registries which are developed during our project are constantly updated and in future utilized by our contracting parties. And of course, one of the key aspects of our project was the preparation of our issuing bodies and the contracting parties for the AIB membership and to become full members and connect to the AIB hub in future. So let's see what we achieved in that. So here on the map, you see actually what happened with the registries. So the idea is that contracting parties would sign direct agreement with the service provider, in this case Grexel, and continue using registries developed during the project. So at the moment we have 3 issuing bodies, and those are from Georgia, Albania, and 1 entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina, particularly Republika Srpska, who signed the agreements and launched their registries. So they're actively using their Grexel registries. On the other hand, we have 3 additional issuing bodies, being from Kosovo, Ukraine, and Montenegro, which just recently signed the agreements, and we expect the launch of their registries actually already next week, so in the beginning of July. We have one ongoing procedure, public procurement procedure, in second entity of Bosnia and Herzegovina in federation, and we expect them to soon have fully functional registry. On the other hand, I briefly mentioned before, Serbia actually had the registry in place and became member of the AIB already in 2019. So Serbia in that context is the most advanced contracting party in energy community, and they were actually supporting all other contracting parties and joining trainings and conferences and sharing their expertise with others. On the other hand, unfortunately, we have 2 contracting parties in which at the moment we don't have development, so we are still waiting for them to finalize necessary legislation and to speed up with enabling of their registries, and those are Moldova, North Macedonia. What is important to emphasize, besides the national domains for the registries, during the project, we also created the regional system. So we enabled the trade of guarantees of origin among our contracting parties before they join AIB and before they connect to the AIB hub and before they're able to trade with EU member states. We did this in 3 stages. So envisage the process which would be the 3 stages. So the stage 1 was a purely regional system. So on the left side, we have the AIB and AIB hub and issuing bodies which are members of the AIB. On the other side, we have energy community domains which are connected to the regional system. So at the moment, the situation is that our contracting parties can trade the guarantees of origin through the Grexel regional system at any moment. The next step will be when some of our contracting parties who are part of the regional system join the AIB. At that point, as you can see, we have the hybrid system. So that means that contracting parties can still trade among each other, or they can decide to trade with AIB hub members or EU member states. The only important information is the ones that guarantee of origin is being traded among contracting parties through the regional system. It cannot go through the AIB hub. So it is important to emphasize that contracting parties have to, in the beginning, decide how they want to trade their guarantees of origin, that they want to do it with the EU member states through the AIB hub or through the regional system with contracting parties. And the third stage, of course, obviously, is something that we are aiming, and this is to have all energy community contracting parties joining AIB and becoming full members of the AIB, connecting to the AIB hub and being able to trade guarantees of origin among each other and with the members of the AIB. However, one important thing to mention in this context, because I'm constantly talking about the technical aspects, however, there is one important obstacle at the moment in RED 2 directive, but also it remained the same in new amendments or RED 3 directive, which provides obstacle for trade of guarantees of origin or restriction for trade of guarantees of origin between EU member states and third countries. In this case, contracting parties of the energy communities are treated as third countries. Of course, in the Article 19.11, which you can see here on the slide, it stated that recognition can be enabled if there is a direct trade of energy and the agreement between the Union and the third country. So because we have energy community in place, of course, we wanted to support all of our contracting parties at the same time to overcome this obstacle. So we started to working jointly with the contracting parties, but also European Commission to come up with a solution to this obstacle. So you can see on the next slide that we jointly with the Commission prepared the roadmap for the recognition of guarantees of origin. This roadmap was presented in December last year on the Energy Community Ministerial Council. The roadmap consists of the several different criteria. It is at the moment not yet publicly available. However, it has been shared with contracting parties, and at the moment all the detailed criteria are being negotiated between on one side, European Commission represented by the EU member states, on the other side, between the contracting parties. But what we can actually expect that this roadmap or the document will have 4 different sets of criteria. One set of criteria is focused to the wider policy background, so to the full transposition and implementation of Clean Energy Package and Renewable Directive. On the other hand, also meeting or setting the 2030 climate and energy targets. This is the process which have been done in energy community in parallel as in the EU member states. And then, of course, progress towards the transposition and implementation of electricity integration package and market coupling with the EU. Then on the other side, we have also as a second step, substantive criteria. These are the regulatory institutional parameters for the compatibility of the system, and of course giving the role to the European Commission to oversee the process. Third set of criteria is purely technical, so it's related to system governance and its effective implementation in practice, including governance, market monitoring, legal and administrative criteria, and of course system management. And the fourth aspect from the roadmap is focusing on the functioning of the energy community regional system, which I earlier described to you. So obviously these criteria are more detailed described in the roadmap, and we are hoping that it will be soon finalized and shared with the public. So how we envisage the process in the future? First of all, for roadmap to be effective, Energy Community Ministerial Council have to adopt a decision with the details of this roadmap. Decision at the moment is being drafted. However, Ministerial Council of Energy Community is having its official meetings only once a year, so at the end of every year. We are hoping that we will be able to finalize the roadmap and have a decision by the end of this year. But in case that does not happen, we expect the decision will be adopted in December 2025. So the second step after the adoption of the decision will be fulfillment of the criteria. So European Commission will evaluate and monitor the fulfillment of criteria. It will be done country by country. So each country will have the opportunity to claim the fulfillment of criteria independently from other countries. There will be annex in the decision, and every time contracting party fulfills the criteria, this contracting party will be added to the annex, and therefore the recognition will be accomplished. So this is the step 2, official recognition of guarantees of origin. And finally, what is important to emphasize that European Commission, in cooperation with Energy Community Secretariat, will constantly monitor if the criteria are still fulfilled and if all the standards are constantly being updated and implemented by the contracting parties. So this is briefly from my side, what is the status of the system of guarantees of origin and what are the next steps. But I'm definitely looking forward to the discussion and your questions and to hear more your views on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Naida. So what we can conclude is that the process of formulating the path that these countries will follow to be integrated in the AIB is that it's getting more and more streamlined, right?
Yes, exactly.
And but the question that I can think of is which part of this, which aspect of these reforms is can be the weak link of this chain of different reforms that need to be done for these countries to be integrated. Meaning, which is the most difficult part of the reforms needed, that these countries need to integrate these reforms, which is the most painful part, let's say?
Personally, I'm a very positive person, so I like to focus on the optimistic part. But
Okay.
the challenges, first one is, of course, to finalize the roadmap and to have the system adopted by the Ministerial Council. On the other hand, what is important and what needs to be done in parallel, so not to wait for the decision to be adopted, but actually to start fulfilling this criteria. And I think what's important for contracting parties to understand that it's not only the technical criteria, which one would assume that full membership in the AIB and connection to the AIB hub would be enough, but actually parallel, they have to do this political criteria, and they have to transpose and implement clean energy package and to work on the achievement of 2030 targets. So it's wider than just focusing on guarantees of origin. And this, I think, will be something which might be a bit challenging in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Naida. Thank you very much. So Naida gave us the overall picture of where we're standing at the moment with the integration of these countries in the AIB, in the geo market, and in general their integration in the energy market of Europe. And now Irina is going to give us share with us her insight on what the impact is going to be after these countries join the AIB and they become a functional part of the market. So she's going to analyze the potential that is in these countries. So Irina, without further ado, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Naida, for kind of setting the scene and giving us the overview of where each contracting party currently stands in their development of the regional geo markets. Yes, as Chris already said, I will try to kind of quantify the potential future kind of supply of guarantees of origin in the energy community. But firstly, I'd like to start with just a brief overview of what's been happening on the European market. Okay, so you probably know the geo markets in the AIB have experienced a fairly steady bearish trend since kind of it kind of started in the middle of last year, and it has been steadily going. The prices have been steadily going down. The main reason has been quite oversupply. Firstly, because 2023 was quite a wet year, so hydro production was quite high, but also production from wind and solar, because we had really record installations of new solar capacities in Europe last year. So naturally, that contributed to the supply boost. On the demand side, the macroeconomic situation was not that great, which naturally affected, the big consumers. Therefore, the demand for geos on one hand was reduced because of just less electricity. Electricity consumption, but also the willingness to pay by consumers has reduced because of macroeconomic conditions. So if you look at the bar chart on the right-hand side, you can see how the supply and demand has been looking. So for 2023, we can see that at least the current data that has been available suggests stagnation in cancellations or in the demand for 2023. However, we're still expecting some data to be reported, so that gap could be smaller. And if we look ahead at 2024, these figures are representative of based on our medium-term forecast. So we can see that the gap definitely is starting to decrease, especially that for this year we also have a much more optimistic economic outlook for Europe. But let's zoom out for a second. The the electricity, the geo market is not only affected by just supply fundamentals. It's also really affected by European law policy. And over the years, we've seen that
Irina, your connection is a bit. It was a bit slow now. Could you please repeat the last part that you said?
Sorry, yes. So what I want to say is that the geo market is not only influenced by the supply and demand by the supply of renewable electricity. It's also influenced heavily by the European regulations, which have over time increased just the role of geos, or strengthened the role of geos, in particular for suppliers and consumers when disclosing their energy mix and other environmental quantities. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of show in this slide that prices have been strengthening since 2021. Of course, when you look at the peak in 2022, it was not only driven by such regulations. We also had a very dry year in 2022, so the hydro supply was reduced there. But yes, what I'm basically trying to illustrate is that we now also, if you look at the table on the right-hand side, new regulations coming into force that are likely to influence the market, especially on the bullish side. So if we take, for example, the RFNBO legislative act, which basically regulates the future production of green hydrogen, among others, the European Sustainability Reporting Directive, then all of these we expect to start having a bullish impact on the geo market. Now, at the bottom, I've also included CBAM because that is one of those regulations that is still very controversial.
Irina, may I interrupt you again? I'm sorry. It's just your voice is being interrupted a little bit. Maybe you could consider switching off your video. That would help convey the sound better.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. So if we look at the potential impact of CBAM, as you can see, we put some question marks there because it is still unclear how CBAM will be regulated in the end. We are still in a transition or reporting phase, which can result in some last-minute regulatory changes before full implementation in 2026. And with that said, CBAM could be bullish for geos in third countries when considering issues like double counting. So if carbon-free electricity is exported to the EU under CBAM, it would be problematic to allow a producer the producer of this electricity to also sell geos elsewhere. So it makes us believe that geos must be bundled to the electricity exported or in some other form cancelled, so that it's not allowed to be traded in order to avoid these double counting issues. But as I said, this is just based on what we see currently. Things may change. Then the potential bearish impact on European geos could come from the fact that state aid schemes that are currently supporting the geo market will need to phase out, as CBAM is supposed to be the main mechanism to avoid carbon leakage. And now, if we take the RFNBO Act as an example and kind of the potential ripple effect it can have onto the energy community. So basically, with this next slide, I wanted to illustrate kind of what could, because as you know, green hydrogen can be imported from third countries. And there have been some projects announced within some of the energy community contracting parties. You can see some of them on the left-hand side. It's by no means an extensive list. So those I managed to find were in Albania, Serbia, and Ukraine. In fact, before the war, Ukraine was regarded as a market with very high potential for green hydrogen production and therefore export to the EU. In November 23, the European Commission supported a project to create a Central European hydrogen corridor between Ukraine, Slovakia, Czechia, Austria, and Germany. And most recently, on 12th of June, the H2U Hydrogen Valley projects were kind of again put on the agenda during a roundtable discussion on the future Ukraine-EU hydrogen corridor. So these are, of course, all projects still living on PowerPoint slides, so very theoretical. We can see some potential there. And then if you look on the right-hand side, the pathways for production of renewable hydrogen. So in that case, in the case of energy community, Albania would be the only country that qualifies for having renewable electricity grid. So you need, I think, at least 90% share of renewables in your grid to qualify for that. And as we know, Albania is pretty much reliant almost entirely on hydro. And now also we're starting to see some more wind and solar installed. But then for all the other contracting parties, it would be the rule on the general grid. So for this case, it would be that the green hydrogen producer will have to secure a PPA with bundled GOs, and plus then to fulfill some temporal or geographical qualification criteria. So let's have a look now at what also, now that we talked about the potential for green hydrogen producers to secure PPAs, how is the PPA market looking in the region? It's still a very underdeveloped market, even though the region has a lot of renewable energy potential.
Irina, sorry to interrupt you again. We are still seeing the hydrogen potential slide. I don't know if you want to change your slide.
I'm trying to. Basically, in the okay. Yes, there we are. So we actually can see that, generally speaking, the contracting parties have quite big renewable pipeline that kind of would even exceed the NECP targets. However, we've only seen one corporate PPA so far in Serbia last year. And in our view, kind of the main obstacles that are likely at the moment kind of delaying the offtake of PPAs in the region is firstly the fact that these are quite illiquid wholesale markets for electricity. On one hand, most regional exchanges, apart from Serbia and Ukraine, that have operated exchanges for a while. The rest of the contracting parties only recently launched their head exchanges, for example. There's also no liquidity on the futures markets. Even Hungary, which is the benchmark for the region, is still fairly illiquid compared to the more developed Western markets. Then there's also a high balancing cost risk. As you know, balancing cost is a key consideration when negotiating a PPA price. And the regional balancing markets, generally, they operate different regimes, but as a whole, there's also a kind of a bit of a monopoly from state-owned utilities that provide the balancing services. So, there are quite a few risks or quite a few challenges that need to be overcome for the PPA market in the region to take off. In fact, I know that the energy community is actively involved currently in a project to identify all of those challenges and potentially find solutions. So yeah, we may see some development there in the near future. My next slide. So I tried to find as much information as possible so that we can kind of quantify the supply of GOs, the future supply of GOs in the energy community. So what you see here is some figures based on what was available as installed capacity in the energy community in 2023, apart from Ukraine, where we took 2021 numbers just because these are the most reliable ones. and then also what was the capacity, what was the production, so the theoretical supply of geos, and then we looked at mainly NECP targets and official announcements to derive the 2030 potential in terms of installed capacity and production. There were some gaps, some missing information that I've disclosed already there on the slides, but this was basically what we could get to kind of the most reliable information. So what we ended up with in terms of installed capacity, we could see capacity going up by over 56% to 46.5 in 2030. And this could then translate in about 112 terawatt hours of renewable production. So again, about a 60% increase from the 2023 figures. So this could be a very rough indicator of potential supply of geos, if, of course, all of those NECP targets that are currently stated are also met. Of course, the NECPs will be changing and kind of finalized, and Ukraine, as the biggest market, will have to really try very hard to implement everything that they have set in stone. And of course, there's a lot of unknowns still there regarding the timeline and the outcome of the war. But again, as I said, this is like it just gives us a good indication of what the market could look like. Now, in the next slide, I just wanted to also dive a bit deeper into the potential, and there is a bit of a caveat to the 112 terawatt hours potential supply. So if you look at the map on the right-hand side, some countries in yellow, so these are Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo, are not issuing GEOs to support the generators. So obviously, we decided to kind of we had to reduce a bit that future potential by removing those capacities. So we took into consideration official announcements in terms of what these countries plan to support, also what the NECPs say, and we ended up with a slightly lower number for the potential of GEOs that could be issued, and that's around 101.5 terawatt hours. And now if you look at the bar charts, here I've also illustrated the supply and demand expectations under two of our base case scenarios from our Veyt long-term model, low electrification and high electrification scenarios. And based on those, under the low electrification scenario, these 101 terawatt hours could represent roughly 9% of the total issuance of GEOs in the AIB, and under the high electrification scenario, this would be 8%. So that's still quite a big figure, but as I said, this is just purely speaking from a supply perspective, and demand, of course, is another matter that is very difficult to quantify at the moment. So I would say that as a conclusion, like what I just as a key takeaway on my side, I would say yes, based on the current confirmed data and current NECP targets, the energy community could issue around 101 terawatt hours of tradable GEOs, but in 2030. The question of where these GEOs would end up will depend, firstly, as Neda mentioned, the signing of mutual agreements for geo recognition with the EU. This would depend, of course, on each contracting party fulfilling all the criteria, then also reaching the NECP targets on time, with Ukraine being kind of the biggest question mark given the situation there. The local demand for GEOs, which I'm sure that it will, develop, and it's very hard to quantify. And then again, on the demand side, the future development of the regional PPA market that would be closely linked to the future potential of green hydrogen production. So that is on my side. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Irina. This was very interesting, and also getting data, getting the numbers, even if they're just estimates for these countries, is quite useful. Irina, I'll just ask you to mute your microphone if you can get the echo. Thank you very much. So Irina, just before we proceed into the Q&A session section of the webinar, I would like to ask you about the so we are seeing that in the contracting parties, some countries have already established their subsidy schemes. Some countries are still in the process of establishing their subsidy schemes. So and also you mentioned that many of these countries in the regulations, they provide that renewable plants that are receiving subsidies will not issue GOs in favor of the producer. So out of this supply potential that you mentioned in your slide, how much of this potentially could be affected by the subsidy schemes? How much of it could not be issued a GO in favor of the producer because of the subsidy of the participation in the subsidy scheme?
Thank you for the question, Chris. So yes, as I mentioned in my slide, it's three main countries that are not issuing GOs. That's Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Kosovo. So for Serbia, in fact, there are already some generators that are supported under the old feed-in tariff scheme. That's around 400 megawatts of wind and 50 megawatts of solar. And then Serbia launched last year a new competitive auction, so contracts for premiums. So the first auction already happened last year, but overall, based on what the NECP says, they're planning to support via those auctions around 2.6 gigawatts. Even though in some initial statements from the ministry were only pointing to 1.3, the NECP says 2.6. So we were kind of conservative and took the full 2.6. Then in just the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, so one of the entities, they have already announced that they will start a support scheme, market-based support scheme that will see around 300 megawatts being supported. As far as I know, there haven't been any auctions yet from that scheme. The other entity, Republika Srpska, they've also said they'd like to start a support scheme, but so far there have been no exact details as to how much they would like to support. And then for Kosovo, they've announced they want to support roughly 1 gigawatt of renewables. Again, a new market-based support scheme that already had the first auction last year. So we are looking at roughly kind of 4.5 gigawatts of like from the future support schemes. And then we have a bit under 1 gigawatt already supported from the old support schemes.
All right. Thanks a lot, Irina. That was very useful clarification. And looking at the time, I think it's time to proceed to the last part of this webinar and look into the questions that our audience has sent us in the Q&A chat. So I'm very happy that because it seems like we're going to answer some questions via email. There's a lot of questions here. And I see that a very repetitive question that a lot of people in our audience want to ask to NIDA is whether there have been transfers already executed between energy community registries. So we have seen that in many of these countries, geo registries have already been established and they're operational. And now the question is there already trade happening between those countries? I'll also ask you, Irina, to switch on your camera if you want, so we start the Q&A session. But Naida, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christos. So no, at the moment we still don't have trades of guarantees of origin among our contracting parties through the regional system. There might be a couple of reasons. First of all, this registries national domains were just launched, so it's quite new. On the other hand, there is not enough, I would say, knowledge, maybe demand as well, but also knowledge among different stakeholders about the benefits of guarantees of origin. So no, at the moment we do not have trades. It's also a big question because, as I mentioned, Serbia is a full member of the AIB. Serbia is trading guarantees of origin through the AIB hub with other so-called third countries, for example, Switzerland. So there have been exports of Serbian GOs to Switzerland through the AIB hub. Serbia, on the other hand, kind of said that they don't plan directly to join the regional system of energy community, but they expect contracting parties to connect to the AIB hub and then to trade with them. So Serbia would be willing to trade, for example, with Moldova or Bosnia and Herzegovina or Albania or whatever, only if they join the AIB and connect to the AIB hub. So it will be interesting to see what is coming. Also, Irina mentioned the PPA. So she mentioned also that at the moment we are conducting the study to analyze the current situation on opportunities both for corporate but also utility PPAs and the cross-border PPAs. So this is also something which could trigger the interest for trade of guarantees of origin among contracting parties.
Thank you very much, Naida. Thank you very much. Another question that is related more to the geo markets and is directed to Irina. So we are the person in the audience that asked the question says that the market sentiment influences highly the market prices of geos, and that the historical highs we saw in prices in 2022 are attributed to trader speculation and high power prices. Could you, Irina, explain a bit more, maybe give a perspective of the supply and demand balance in 2022 that could explain why prices hiked in 2022 while today they are significantly lower?
Yes, thank you, Chris. So as I mentioned in my presentation, we kind of contribute the big spike in 2022 on one hand to, as I mentioned, the increased role of the European legislation.
Sorry to interrupt you. Maybe you switch off your camera because your voice is interrupted again. So I think it will be helpful.
Yes. Yes. So as I mentioned in my slides, what I would say for this peak in 2022, it's probably a combination. On one hand, we've seen the gradual increase in the role of just the geo market over the years, thanks to the new European legislations and more policy that was influencing the market. And then on top of that, 2022 was a particularly dry year. And as you know, geos or hydro geos are a key component of the geo supply balance. So I would say it was probably a combination of that. I cannot say to what extent any speculation was played a role, because it's very difficult to quantify.
All right, thank you very much, Irina, for the clarification. And there is another question directed to Naida now, related to granular geos. So this question is asking if there are plans to introduce matching of production and consumption closer to real time in the countries of the energy community with the introduction of granular geos. So, I mean, it's kind of a long shot to talk about granular geos when we already are still making our baby steps in the geo system in general. But Naida, would you see that there are trends that could spur the demand for granular geos in the countries of the energy community?
Thank you, Christos, and thanks to Akos for the question. I would fully agree with you. It's a bit early to talk about that when we are still trying to establish the systems for geos in our contracted parties. But what is also important to clarify that although we are transposing EU law in energy community, we are very often doing it with a bit of delay. So usually a couple of years after the member states, those acts are adopted in energy community. So at the moment, we are transposing RED II directive. Our ministerial council have not yet adopted RED III directive, so this is yet not obligation for our contracting parties. And on the other hand, as you said, it's quite fresh in the EU as well. So this is now my personal opinion. I don't think that our contracting parties will be pioneers and lead this trend, but definitely if this trend flies in the EU, we will follow.
Thank you, Naida. Thank you very much. I'm still receiving a lot of questions, so I'll just move on to the next question. So this one could be directed to both of you. So let's start with Naida, who's our guest. What we see in even in the countries belonging to the AIB, there is a very large disparity in willingness to pay for guarantees of origin. In some countries, consumers are willing to pay way more than they are in other countries, especially in Eastern Europe. So the question here has to do with the willingness to pay in the countries of the energy community, and if there is also a difference in the willingness to pay among the countries belonging in the energy community, not only compared to the countries of the AIB, but also among them, a comparison among them. What would you say, Naida, on this?
Thanks to Dina, and greetings to Dina. Thanks for the question. Actually, yes, this is a very good point. We expect the decrease of interest once contracting parties join the AIB and once the recognition is achieved. So definitely we see that this will, or we expect that this should boost the demand for guarantees of origin in contracting parties. Price-wise, as you mentioned, Christos, but also awareness-wise among stakeholders, among citizens, among industries. I think there is definitely still bigger interest and understanding in EU member states rather than in contracting parties. And I think there is no big difference among our contracting parties. Majority of our contracting parties not yet fully transposed and implemented obligation of disclosure arising from the electricity directive. So there is still no in place obligation for suppliers to show the final bill to consumers the portion of the electricity coming from renewables. So there are still many steps to be achieved, and I think the recognition from the EU and achievement of all the criteria from roadmap and the full membership of the AIB should definitely contribute to the increase of the demand.
Yeah, and I think what you said is really interesting, that stakeholders also need time to get familiar with the new regulatory framework, because we also see that in many countries that recently joined the AIB, sometimes market participants are not really sure on how the disclosure system works and how the guarantees of origin, what is the exact role of guarantees of origin. But Irina, what is your approach on this question?
Yes, I would also say that probably it would be very difficult to distinguish between willingness to pay between contracting parties. Probably would also need to think about, kind of the presence of international companies that may have operations in the contracting parties, and those companies that then could have kind of better understanding of the market and therefore could be willing to pay more for if they decide to use GOs for their operations in the region. But yeah, it's very difficult, I would say, at the moment to make any comparison.
All right. Okay. And we still have some time. We still have a couple of minutes. Maybe as a concluding question, we could ask you, Irina, how do you see the supply and demand balance in the geo market over the next 2 years, especially considering that, as we saw in one of your slides, that the integration of the energy community countries will add a lot to the supply side. So what is your very, very brief take on what the supply and demand balance could be the next 2 years?
Yes, well, briefly, I guess, yeah, we need to say how the macroeconomic picture develops and whether it will continue to improve, not only this year but also next year, because that would be crucial, especially for the big companies that use GOs for their disclosure. Of course, things that we cannot really foresee, the weather, right? So the hydro balance, the production from solar and wind, and the new capacities that are likely to be introduced. And then, of course, as I already reiterated, all those new legislations that are starting to influence more and more counterparties, I would say, in the EU, that would also, of course, play a role.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Irina. Thank you so much, Naida, for joining us. We really appreciate your presence here today. We will conclude our webinar now since we are running out of time, but I would really like to thank both of you, and I would really like to thank our audience for participating. We will make sure that we'll answer the rest of your questions via email. And thank you so much. Have a great day. Naida, have a great day. Irina, thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you, Christos, and thanks to all the participants.